Hi everyone, my name is JD and this is my channel Frost and Forest. So today I wanted to share with you all the decks that I am planning on using in November. And as I'm talking about those decks, I am also going to talk to you a little bit about my tarot practice. And so the things that I kind of do each month with cards. And for me, I use my decks very seasonally. And so for me, November is kind of a time of, it's the end of the fall. A lot of the leaves have fallen, at least where I am in Wisconsin. We haven't gotten a ton of snow yet, but it's that kind of late fall feeling. And so as a part of that, I tend to use decks that sort of have that feeling to them. And so November is also a time that I try to think about what I'm grateful for as well. And so that kind of plays into the decks that I've chosen and what I'm planning to do. If you enjoy the series, I'm considering talking about the decks that I use each month more regularly. And so if that's something that you would enjoy hearing about, I would appreciate it if you could put a comment in it so I know that there is actually interest in this topic. Let's get started. The first practice that I do each month is I do a weekly card pull. And so I usually do this on Sundays, and I usually try to pick decks that feel very much like this time of year to me. A lot of times, if there is kind of a Season of the Witch oracle deck that is sort of appropriate for the time of year, then I'll use that. But, for me, for November, it's kind of the time between, Samhain and Yule, and so it doesn't quite feel appropriate. But again, that's just me. It doesn't quite feel appropriate for me. So for my week ahead spreads that I do on Sundays, I am using 3 different decks. So the first deck that I'm using is the Vintage Wisdom Oracle. So for this deck, I use it sort of as the kind of central theme of the week. And so, this is often the first card that I will pull in a spread. But, it's just kind of the theme or what I can expect or how I should approach the week in front of me. And this just very much feels like the energy of November to me. It's got that kind of parchment color. It sort of has historical art and photos in it. And so, it just feels right for this time of year. Also say it's been kind of interesting to work with this deck because I got this deck and I really wanted to use it along with a different deck. And so I started doing daily pulls with it. And at least for me, this deck did not work for daily pulls. It gave me kind of crazy answers. And I think what I learned is that this deck is really meant to be for more serious, more, real questions, more hard-hitting, I guess. I don't know. And so it has, I have used it in more serious situations with more certain questions, and it tends to work a lot better. And also, I have pulled it 1 week already in November, and it worked pretty well for a week ahead spread. So, at least for this one, I think I'm learning that it just needs to be a little bit more guided or a little bit more serious. So this is the first deck that I'm using for my week ahead spread. So then the next deck that I'm using is the Relative Tarot. This is also a mass market deck. And I'm using this in the spread position of sort of like the obstacle. So I really see that part of the spread as, what should I be thinking about, or how should I be approaching any obstacles that I might encounter in the week ahead. So yeah, I've been using this deck for that. This deck does not have what you might call a traditional guidebook, at least not in the mass market edition. Focuses on numerology, which is very cool. It does a lot of different ways that you can do math to try to get different information about the cards, and it's pretty cool. But if you are not you know, if you're a beginner with tarot, this probably is not a good deck to start with. But I am really enjoying it, using it, and it actually pairs super well with the Vintage Wisdom. Because again, they both have sort of that, you know, old, like historic photography and, you know, historic people in it. But I also like this deck. I think it's a little bit, you know, sassy, and I think it just, I sort of like the nods to the RWS that are in it. And so, yeah, this is the deck that I'm using in that sort of obstacle position. And then the last deck that I've been using for my week ahead spread is the Carte Postale Tarot. This is an indie deck, and for my week ahead spread, I will use this as the card that I pull for a blessing. So like what kind of blessings should I be looking for in the week ahead, or how should I approach it to try to create blessings for myself? And so I've been using this deck for that position. And part of the reason why I've been doing that is because I really like this deck, and, you know, I love the Lovers card in this deck. And it felt like it really goes in that blessings category. I was also pretty grateful that I have this deck because, you know, it was out of print for a really, really long time. I do think maybe it was for sale on Etsy again, or is. I don't know. Don't quote me on that. But I heard that this year it was coming back into print, which is awesome, because it is a great deck, and I think it is, you know, it should be available to more people. Yeah, so this is the blessing deck. Also, you know, you might wonder why I'm using the Relative Tarot and the Carte Postale Tarot together, because they do seem very similar. And I agree with you. They do feel like very similar decks. And so part of why I'm using both of them this month is because I am trying to better understand if I want to keep the Relative Tarot or not. I definitely want to keep this deck, but, you know, I was trying to understand if that's true. And I will say, at least so far, granted, I've only done this, you know, for 1 week so far, but so far I do want to keep the Relative Tarot. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that the Relative Tarot has quite a bit more diversity in it than this deck does. This deck is, you know, pretty white people centric. And so, you know, I like having that diversity in a deck that sort of has this feeling to it. So, I don't know, there's that Lovers card. I love that Lovers card. I think it's a beautiful Lovers card. But yeah, this deck is just kind of sassy and fun. And this one also doesn't really have a guidebook, but, it, you know, so it's maybe not the best for beginners, but it's also just, it's just kind of a fun deck. So, like I said, this is the deck that I'm using for the blessings part of my 3-card spread. What I do looks very similar to this for each week. So I just pull a theme card. I pull an obstacle card. Ooh, interesting, the Tower. And then a blessing card. I would for sure read the guidebook of what enchantment means, but I would be thinking about, you know, trying to find the magic in my week. Even if there are situations that feel suddenly really bad, this would, you know, you would try to find the magic afterwards, because these tower moments are not always, you know, they might be fast and swift, but they, you know, don't last forever. And so what comes out of it sometimes is needed change. And so, you know, again with the Page of Cups, looking for those brighter moments and looking for those positive things, you know. So this would be sort of an example week ahead spread for me. Another fun thing about November, I should say, is that you know, it gets dark earlier than it does at other points in the year. And so I am still kind of navigating what that means with my schedule and creating videos. And so If there are a lot of shadows in this video, I apologize. I'm still kind of like working out what it means to create videos in November. So just know if there are a lot of shadows, I'm working on it. Moving on to the next practice that I do every month is I do have a full moon practice that it's important to me to do on the full moon. I will say, you know, each year I try to focus it differently. And so this year I am actually focusing it around this deck, which is kind of cool. And if you want to learn more about that, I actually have a whole video that I did about my full moon practice. So I will link it and you can check that out. You know, honestly, I'm doing, you know, working with this deck this year, but next year I might focus on a different deck or focus on a different way of celebrating the full moon. I think, you know, so many different cultures celebrate and think about the full moon that I take my full moon practice as an opportunity to learn new things and to focus on new things. And so that's why sort of each year it evolves. Then the third practice that I do each month is I am a part of Dawn Michelle's membership. So she has sort of a facilitated practice that she does each month. And, you know, if you join the membership, you get access to this monthly practice. And I will say, this is one that, like, for example, last month when I was really, really busy, it kind of fell to the wayside. But this, you know, November, I want to kind of recommit to it. And a part of doing that was really actually thinking about the decks that I wanted to do in connection to it. And so that is going to be the next part that I'm going to talk to you about. I will say that, you know, Dawn Michelle works really hard on these, so I'm not going to go into too much detail because I do think it's her ideas to share, not mine, but I feel like I can talk about the decks and how they relate to me and what I'm thinking about. So the first deck that I'm going to talk about is the Forest of Enchantment Oracle. So this is such a beautiful new Oracle deck, and I actually really, really love this deck. I've been using it a lot. I think it is just a beautiful deck. I think it's easy to use. I think the messages are great. And so this is one that I really wanted to bring in this month. And so as a part of this practice, for the first week, basically you had to choose 4 cards that were going to kind of be the direction that the 4 different weeks in November were going to take. And so I went ahead and pulled my 4 cards for each week using this deck because I really wanted to use this deck this month. And so after I did that, I then let the 4 cards that I pulled kind of dictate the decks that I was going to use each week. So I will actually show you guys the cards that I pulled because I think it relates to the decks that I chose. The first card that I pulled for the first week is the Oak and Holly King. This card is a great card. It talks about sort of inevitable change and just the moving through the year and moving through the season. And if y'all don't know, it's a really fun legend that it is the legend of the Holly King and the Oak King. So from the summer solstice to the winter solstice, the Holly King rules. And then from the winter solstice to the summer solstice, the Oak King rules. And so each time on those holidays, they have this sort of symbolic fight, but everybody knows how it's going to go. And, you know, I think that's a cool card. So when I pulled that card, I decided to use the, I have it in this bag, but it is the Green Witch Tarot. And so the reason that I decided to use this deck is because as far as I know, and I mean, I could be wrong, I have quite a few decks, but as far as I know, this is the only deck that I have that has a Oak King and Holly King card. And so it just felt very appropriate for this time of year. So I did end up using this for the first week of November. And you know, it worked pretty well. This deck always works really well for me. It is sort of an old favorite of mine. I tend to use this deck sort of September through kind of Christmas time, just because it has that sort of fall, late fall feeling to it. But then it also has, I tend to use this deck around Christmas a little bit too, because it just has that sort of community and family feeling to me of like people coming together. Okay, so then, yeah, so here we have the Holly King. But yeah, it's sort of people coming together. And so this deck definitely feels like people coming together. And so, you know, yes, I used it because this card came up, but also I used it because this just feels like a deck for this time of year. And it always feels like an old friend kind of coming out and talking to you. So I really love this deck. I think it is, you know, it's a great all-around deck. It has a pretty good guidebook as well. And so, you know, I had to pull out this old friend for the first week. Okay, so then for week 2 in the Dawn Michelle practice, I pulled the door into summer. And this card very much feels like sort of a spring card to me. It kind of focuses on like increased energy and going into a world of increased energy, and increased activity, growth, expansion, all of those kinds of things. And so for week 2, which I haven't actually done yet, for week 2, I'm going to use the Enchanted Forest, Forest of Enchantment Tarot. And so this is the matching tarot deck, of course, but it felt like kind of stepping into that forest land to me. And so that's why I decided to use this deck. It's actually kind of interesting because this is a deck that I had quite a while ago, and then I rehomed it because honestly, it felt like too much green. Like everything was green, and I know someone who's into forests, it's a little weird to have someone say that it feels like too much green, but it did. And so I rehomed this deck, but then I got this oracle and I absolutely loved it. And so then I was like, okay, maybe I should give this tarot deck another try. And so I haven't used it a ton since I got my new copy of it. So it's going to be really interesting this week to see how it does with that practice. Just because, you know, there was a reason I rehomed it, but also I kind of have a new reason why I might actually really love it. And of course, other people rave about this deck. And so, you know, I'm ready to give it another chance this week. So we shall see. And then for week 3, I pulled the Hag card, which is one of my very favorite cards from this deck. And this card very much focuses on accepting truth and wisdom. The Hag has a lot of knowledge, has lived a long life. It's accepting the truth and wisdom, even if it's not the easiest thing in the world to do. And so for me, when I saw this card, I decided to use, and it's in this bag, but this is the Witch Sisters Tarot. This deck just has very much of that Hag energy. And so I'm really excited to pull it in the 3rd week of November. I really love this deck. You know, I like the Kalyak, and this, that goddess appears quite a bit in this deck, which I think is also great. But I also just like, you know, that there is a lot of that crone energy in this deck, which is why I thought it made sense to work with it this week when I pulled this card. But this is also just in general a beautiful, beautiful deck. I got it a while ago, and the first year I had it, I actually did, I read the guidebook cover to cover, which I will tell you is not something I commonly do. I'm not usually the kind of person that does that. But in this case, I wanted to because there was so much knowledge and there was just so much thought, I think, that went into this deck. And so I did it. And so again, you know, this also feels like a very November deck. It's got those brown colors in it. It's got that kind of, what is the word? It's got that kind of like, I don't know what the word is, but you know how in the fall when leaves start to fall and like things kind of get more restful and like death happens, I guess. I don't know what the word I'm trying to say is, but it has that energy to it. And so yeah, this felt like the right choice for this week in November. The last deck that I pulled in for that practice in November is the Hagstone. And this very much has sort of like moon energy to me. It feels magical, you know, in this card, who are the actual hairs versus who are just stones. You know, things can be misleading. So this is the card that I pulled. And so because of that, I actually chose a deck, which is called the Celtic Wisdom Tarot. And the reason I chose this deck is because this card felt very much like Celtic magic-y. And so I thought that this deck might be a good one because this deck very much focuses on Celtic mythology. So I thought I would give it a try, and I thought it would be a good connection for that week. This is actually, I also had another reason for choosing this deck. This is one that I've had for actually maybe a year or two now, that I have just kind of been waiting for the right time to do a study of it. But I haven't done it yet. You know, there's so many different things to learn in the world that this one just hasn't come forward yet. But I really, you know, I love the colors in this deck, and I love that this deck has so much to offer. And so, you know, I do want to take that time with it. And so I thought that the last week of November might be a good opportunity to start that. And the other thing I'll say is like this deck has a like Yule / Christmassy feel to it. It's got these very like saturated and deep greens and reds. Like, doesn't that kind of feel like a Christmassy card? And there's a few other ones in there that just have that feeling. And so I might, or, you know, like that's kind of a Christmassy card. I am thinking that, you know, I might start with my Dawn Michelle's practice in the last week of November, but then kind of keep this deck out and keep using it. And that week would just kind of be the start with the deck, is my hope. Now, we'll see if that actually happens. But I am hopeful because I want to spend some time with this deck. The other thing I'll say is this deck, you know, was a mass market deck. I do believe it is out of print now. Actually, I lied. I know it's out of print right now, but it is a deck that comes up pretty regularly, I think, on like eBay. So if it's a deck that you like, you can get it for like indie deck prices, not like banana prices, but just like, you know, indie deck prices. And so, you know, it is available, I think. But I just think it's beautiful. I think the colors in it are beautiful. And I just think it'll be a great deck to work with. Okay, so those are the decks that I'm planning on working with, you know, with these 4 energies in November with Dawn Michelle's practice. So I think that'll be cool. The decks that I showed you are sort of what I'm going to focus on in that week. But I will say a lot of times I do end up pulling in other Oracle decks that match. So those likely won't be the only decks that I use for that practice, but they are at least sort of my starting place. And then, so the last category of decks are new decks that I just want to play with. These are decks that just came in and I just want to find reasons to use them this month because they're new and it's fun. So the first deck that I'm going to show you all, and I have to hold my finger here because YouTube is silly, but is the Ethereal Goddess Tarot. If you continue to watch my channel, the thing you'll learn about me is that I love a pink deck. I just do. I love a pink deck. I'm kind of a sucker for a pink deck. And so I got this purely because, not purely, I got this because it was a pink deck and I was excited about it. And I do have the other deck that this creator did that was pink, Tarot of Aphrodite. And so it will be interesting as I use this deck more, how it compares to that deck. But in general, I'm kind of excited that this is a pink deck and that this feels a little bit softer. The imagery feels, I don't want to say blurry, but it feels softer. And so it definitely has a different vibe than their other pink deck, I think. And so, yeah, I'll probably try to find ways to use it and see how I like it. I will also say I'm only showing you the cards that I think that I can show you. I think it's a little bit silly that YouTube is being weird about nudity these days, but it is. And so those are kind of the cards that I felt comfortable showing you, which I'm going to be honest, was only about half the deck. So you can both see the beautiful gilding and see all of the cards that I could not show you. But yeah, this is a new deck that I'm going to try to work with this month. And then the other new deck that I got recently that I'm going to try to work with is the Seasons of the Witch Winter Tarot. So, of course, I'm sure many of you, well, maybe you've seen this deck. It came out pretty recently. It is the tarot deck that kind of goes along with the same creator that did the Season of the Witch Oracle decks. And I decided to go out and get this deck. So I was very confident that I was not going to get this deck until we got snow, because I didn't want to have this deck before we had snow. So last weekend, Wisconsin got at least in the area of Wisconsin that I was in, got a little bit of snow. And so let's be real, I kind of used that as an excuse to get this deck. So I ran out and got this deck because it was snow and it was the first snow, and the first snow was always magical. And so I wanted to have this new deck to play with the magic of the first snow. And, you know, the snow did not last very long. It stayed for about a day and then it melted. And so it will probably be even more magical when the real first snow, with like snow that actually stays on the ground, happens. But I did think it would be fun to get this deck. And so, you know, at least up until this point, I don't have a whole lot to say about this deck because I haven't used it a ton. I just did a couple of card pulls when I first got it. But it seems like a good deck. Sarah over at Cedar Moon Witch made the comment about how every single card has the word winter in it. And I think that is perhaps overkill. We maybe didn't need that. But that's still okay. And I still will enjoy this deck because, at least for me personally, I feel like there are not enough true like winter snowy scene decks out there in the world, or at least that I have. And so I'm excited to be able to add one more of those to my collection. So this is the other new deck that hopefully we get more snow, so I will be able to pull this deck out again, but we will see. Well, thank you all for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. You know, I would be curious to hear what are some of the decks that you're planning on using in November. I would also be interested to hear about some of the like practices that you do each month. You know, I always like hearing what other people do because it can give me ideas for some things that I might want to try or might want to bring into my practice. So, like I said, I would love to hear the decks that you're using this month and any kind of monthly practices that you all have. If you enjoyed this video, I would love it if you could give it a like. If you are subscribed to my channel, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. If you enjoyed this video as well and you're not subscribed, you might want to think about subscribing just because it will notify you when I release another video, which I do pretty regularly. But anyway, have a wonderful November and thanks for stopping by.